Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Today I wanted to spend some time talking about STEM and social good. More specifically, how students can develop their interests and passions in STEM while also bettering their community. I wanted to first provide you a little bit of background about myself. I am an independent educational consultant, meaning I work with students that are planning on applying to private school, to college, as well as graduate school programs, and I help guide them through the process. I have a special connection to this presentation as well because I have degrees in STEM, and I used to work as a researcher in the Yale Medical School in Connecticut. So I feel really strongly about helping students find their interests in STEM, grow those passions, and doing so in a way that's really going to better their community locally and even globally. And I spend a lot of time every year staying very up to date on all of the changes happening in college, in the college admissions process, as well as ways that students can really engage in whatever areas they're particularly interested in, such as STEM in this case. So I think it's really important to start in talking about how STEM and social good are actually very closely linked together. STEM affects all aspects of life, and it's really easy to actually find out how you can take an interest that you have and use it for the good of others. I think a lot of people initially think that if you have an interest in STEM, that automatically means you're going to be sitting at a lab bench doing research, but that's not the case. You absolutely could do that, and there's some great lab bench research that also really betters people's lives as well from all the studies that are done. But there are so many other ways to bridge STEM and the community together. So for example, a student could use their interest in coding in order to build a website for a nonprofit organization, right? A student could use their interest in medicine and helping others to volunteer at a local nursing home or potentially even an animal shelter. So these two ideas of STEM and social good really can go hand in hand. They don't need to be two separate things. So I first wanted to spend some time talking about how a student could develop and show their interests in different STEM areas. What are ways that students can really grow their passion for STEM subjects? So the first thing I like to talk about is there's a lot of online resources available to students when they're doing sort of that initial exploration in STEM. And I just put two examples here. Students can go to Science. It's a website, it's also a publication, and they can read about many of the different things that have been recently discovered in so many different topics within STEM fields. If students know that they particularly have an interest more geared towards maybe pre-health or medicine side of STEM, healthcarepathway.com is a great website for being able to see all the different career opportunities and paths that a student could take in medicine and healthcare. So these are sort of just good initial ways to begin to explore on sort of the surface level different STEM topics. Beyond that, I really tell students to consider actually looking at books. So there's so many books about STEM that are not specifically linked, right, to a textbook or something that they might need for school. There's a lot of pop culture books that are related to STEM, and there are absolutely STEM-focused books that are also about how to better the planet or better a student's community. So there's an example book I put on here about the problem with plastic, know your facts, take action, save the oceans, right? So it's learning about a particular area within sort of environmental science and really even marine biology, and using that knowledge in order to better the environment. Beyond sort of general websites and books, I tell a student to really consider what courses they're taking in school. So once a student has begun to develop an interest in STEM from doing some preliminary research, there's a lot of ways to incorporate STEM within their high school coursework. Oftentimes there are options for students to take elective STEM classes, sort of additional STEM classes beyond oftentimes the basic science classes that they're required to take at their school. These electives might be in something like anatomy and physiology, or marine biology, or even engineering, for example. And I tell students that if they're beginning to develop an interest in STEM and they find that they're really passionate about it, they may want to consider also taking some advanced courses within STEM, sort of like AP Science or AP Math courses at their school. Typically, most students would take those later in their high school career. But in order to be able to do that, students really need to plan early. So some courses at certain high schools, the advanced courses, have prerequisites, certain things that you need to take before. So I just tell a student the earlier they can kind of begin to plan out their high school coursework, the better. A lot of students will not think about their courses for the following year until course registration rolls around in, February or March of a particular year. But try to think about it, a little bit further out than that, and even maybe for the year after, so you can plan ahead. And I do recognize that because of scheduling or just limited offerings, sometimes schools are not going to have the courses that a student's interested in. Maybe a student has done some exploration and they've begun to realize they have an interest in neuroscience, and their school doesn't offer anything in that. There are definitely other options and ways to seek out learning about neuroscience, for example, outside of the classroom. So one of those ways to really learn about these subjects outside of the typical school classes is actually online classes as well. This is a really great way to explore interests. There are many different types of online classes. There are some that are non-credit. These tend to be, shorter classes that a student could potentially do in even a few weeks. There are classes that are for credit. These tend to be longer. They're more involved. They'll have exams and things like that. It's treated like very similarly to an actual course in school. There are some classes where you can get a certificate for showing that you've completed it. And some examples of places where you can do online sort of coursework. Two of my favorites are edX and Coursera. These are both platforms where different colleges and universities have posted online courses that they typically offer at their actual school, and they're making them available to students all around the world. And for the majority of these classes, there isn't a direct cost associated with them, and there isn't a direct prerequisite like you had to have done this particular thing to register for it. Although in a lot of cases, if it's a more advanced class, if you don't have the basic background knowledge, it's going to be harder to understand, so you might want to try to start with a more introductory course. But online classes are a great way to supplement what you might be getting in school to further your STEM interests. Another thing to really consider is that if you find your STEM interest is growing and you see it as something you may want to pursue further into the future, like into college, as a college major, as a career, I think it's a great idea to consider seeking out a STEM mentor. A STEM mentor is someone who has some experience in a STEM field. Maybe they have degrees in STEM, they're working, in STEM as part of their career, and they can really give you some advice and guidance. I think it's important because there's a lot of different ways to be interested in STEM, a lot of different things you can study, and a lot of different job types you can have. It's pretty complex. And I think that when you talk to someone who has had these experiences, it can really be helpful. I know for me, having degrees in STEM, having done research in more than one institution when I was actually in school and then after I graduated, allows me to provide sort of different advice to students than maybe if I hadn't had these experiences. I think there's a lot of options for who might be considered a STEM mentor, who you can turn to. Definitely a STEM teacher from a school, or your own school. A guidance counselor sometimes maybe as well. A professor at a local university, if that's an option for you, maybe a healthcare professional, or there's definitely options to seek out sort of private consulting help to have like STEM mentorship as well. So I feel like once a student has sort of been exposed to different STEM areas, and they've begun to figure out which ones they're particularly interested in, and maybe they've talked to a mentor and they sort of realize that this is a path they want to continue down, it's quite important to think about gaining science and STEM experience. And I want to talk about why that's important. First of all, when you gain hands-on experience in a particular subject, you get a different understanding if that subject is really for you. So, for example, a student might have taken biology in school and really enjoyed it, explored it a little more online, ended up taking an online, short course, maybe in neuroscience because their school didn't offer it. That student then having the opportunity to work in a neuroscience lab or shadow someone who is working in neuroscience, or maybe someone who happens to be a brain surgeon, can give them a really different perspective. I have students who have these sort of hands-on experiences after initially learning about a subject, and it really strengthens their interest in the subject. And then I have other students who realize the subject or that type of work isn't really for them, right? For example, being able to do research in a lab, you have to be very independent, and sometimes it can be a very isolating job, but also very rewarding. But the different facets that go into a research environment are not necessarily a good fit for everyone. But until you try these things out, you really have no way to know. The other reason it's so important to try to gain hands-on experience associated with subjects you're interested in is that colleges really want to see that students have thoroughly explored their interests outside the classroom. Because in a lot of colleges, when you apply, you're applying to a particular major, for example. And if a student says, yes, I'm applying to this school for chemistry, the college really feels more confident in admitting a student and having them go down that path if they've had multiple types of experiences associated with chemistry, for example. Now, I know that sometimes it can be hard to have in-person experiences, whether it's because it's during the school year or places you might go to have those in-person experiences could be far away, something like that. So I'd like to make it clear to students there's absolutely online ways to gain some initial experience with research with STEM. And so I gave some examples here. Students really have the ability to get involved in large-scale science research projects that are going on. Oftentimes, these projects require lots of data from lots of different types of people. And so the researchers who are running these experiments or projects will seek citizens, right? Seek other individuals to help them. And then oftentimes you're referred to as a citizen scientist. So I've given some listings here of ways that students can really get involved. So things like citizenscience.gov and scistarter.org, you can go there and look at different projects that are being run by different institutions, different people, and different ways to get involved and help contribute to their work. And I think it's a great way to gain some initial exposure to kind of what a large research project or experiment might look like from in an online or sort of a virtual setting. And sometimes these experiments even really do have a hands-on component. If you get involved in them, you might be going out into your own environment to collect samples or to measure temperatures or do something like that, depending on the situation. Beyond, this sort of online projects, other ways to really gain hands-on experience is to consider school-associated activities and clubs. A lot of schools have things like green team or robotics or science team or something along those lines. Some schools have community service-oriented clubs, and again, you might wonder how that connects. But if the community service club is going around and, either removing trash from a particular environment or they are removing invasive species that exist in a local park, right? These things do connect to STEM. So there's different ways to think about that. And if your school doesn't have a club for something that you're interested in, you can always think about actually establishing one yourself. That is absolutely something to do if you feel confident. I have had students do this before. I had a student who was particularly interested in animals and animal scientists and thought he might want to be a veterinarian later on. And they didn't have any sort of club associated with that at his school, so he decided to found one himself. And when he did, he couldn't believe how many other people felt passionately about, animals and animal care and who signed up for his club. And he had a really interesting community component because, in addition to having people who had jobs and careers associated with animals come speak to the club and the club members, he also organized every quarter some sort of event where the club members would go out and help animals in one way or another. Sometimes, for example, it was going to an animal shelter or doing a drive and collecting blankets and food and things like that for different animal groups. So there's absolutely ways to start things yourself if you don't see them already at your school. And oftentimes there are plenty of other people who are really also interested in the topic you're interested in as well. Beyond school-associated activities, I think one thing a student can really consider is what they do with their summer and how they can look at STEM and healthcare-focused options. So there's really two different types of programs in the summer, generally speaking, that have to do with STEM and healthcare. And one of them are non-credit programs. So these programs, are usually focused on a particular topic, and you'll have multiple courses and activities around this particular topic. And these courses are usually, they vary, but somewhere from 2 to 4 weeks long in the summer. I like these opportunities because they let you to delve deeper. Oftentimes, if they're in person, they're really hands-on. You gain a different type of experience with the subject. And, pretty much all STEM and healthcare related subjects are very hands-on to some extent. But they also allow you to interact with others interested in that topic and learn from them, learn from their experiences, also learn from what they've done. I think that this is a really great opportunity, and I gave you some examples here of some different types of focused programs that you can participate in. In addition to those STEM and healthcare focused summer programs, another option for the summer for students is to consider taking courses for undergraduate credit. So some institutions, some colleges and universities, both large universities and sort of local regional community colleges, will allow students to take courses for undergraduate credit. And oftentimes these courses that students sign up for as high schoolers, they will be in classes with other college students. So this is a great opportunity because if you've really done all these other things to develop your interest in a subject, you can take it to another level by deeply studying it at the undergraduate level. And colleges, from another perspective, love to see when students have taken courses for college or undergraduate credit because these courses are viewed more highly than AP level courses, which are usually or oftentimes the highest level courses that a student could potentially take in school. And there's even a place on the application, or most college applications, that will allow a student to talk about what college courses they may have taken and provide transcripts as well. And a lot of these different colleges and universities that allow students to do this will offer very specific courses in specific areas that a student wouldn't have access to in their own high school environment. So in addition to taking and doing some sort of summer program, whether it's for credit or not for credit, I think it's always good for students to consider sort of one-on-one, hands-on STEM and healthcare experiences. And I say those generally fall into two categories. One category is shadowing. And shadowing would be sort of accompanying someone, observing someone who has a career in a STEM or healthcare fields and seeing oftentimes what their job is like. It's a little bit more passive. It is hands-on and you do get to see the environment, which I think is great, but it doesn't always mean that you yourself are doing particular activities, right? You're more watching. So the other option are things like lab internships. And these sort of lab and STEM internships could be in an academic environment with like a college or university professor and researcher, or in private industry, so companies. So depending on where you're located, a lot of major cities have STEM associated or healthcare associated private companies that do research as well. And I tell students there's really two options for these lab internships, as far as there's ones where a student self-initiates, meaning they reach out to a researcher or a lab that they're interested in potentially working with and asking about an internship, or you go through a program that usually helps place you in an internship. So an example of that would be like Boston University has a RISE program where you apply and then you're really placed in an internship with a researcher. My personal opinion is I prefer the self-initiated internships where a student is directly contacting a professor. And the reason I say that is when a student does an internship program instead, there's oftentimes multiple students and sometimes more than one student per researcher. And sometimes you don't get quite the same one-on-one experience. And they're also quite competitive. And sometimes you don't have complete choice of what the researcher's research topic is. Whereas if you contact researchers yourself, there's more flexibility there. Oftentimes they're going to take you on more, individually. And I find oftentimes students have better experiences in this case. And you can learn so much from these lab internships and shadowing situations. And oftentimes the people that you work with can really become great STEM mentors also. So I wanted to just talk about briefly, like if you're interested in doing a lab internship, how you'd go about actually securing a position, because a lot of students are really quite unsure about what to do. I think it's really important to develop a system to reach out to these potential individuals. So I tell students to think about local companies as well as colleges and universities and look at their different departments in STEM that are of interest to the student. Look at the faculty profiles. These are the researchers and the professors on their website. Look at what they're researching. Look at what they've recently published for the work that they're doing. And pick out individuals of interest. Do some research about these individuals and what they are researching and what they're teaching about. And formulate like a solid email to reach out to them. And the thing that I remind students is when you do reach out, it's often you need to reach out to many people. Okay? I'd say typically students will hear back from maybe approximately 20% of the professors, the researchers they reach out to. I wouldn't take this personally that people are very busy or they missed your email or something like that, or they're, away and they're on vacation. And so it's important to try to reach out to a good number so that you have some that you hear back from. And if you are fortunate enough to hear back from multiple people and you have some options, to try to look for those people or talk to those people to see who might offer you a better mentorship opportunity. So the research the person is doing, is to some extent important. But if this person is devoting a lot of time, energy, and effort into you and answering your emails and maybe talking to you on the phone or inviting you down to their lab and things like that, that's usually a good sign. And that person's going to be able to teach you a lot more than someone who doesn't invest a lot of time and energy and effort into you and maybe just passes you off to someone else in the lab, right? So if you really follow a system and reach out to a good number of people, I've absolutely had students be successful in securing research positions. So I think once you engage in these different types of experiences, whether it's summer programs, whether it's a research internship, it's important to then make the most of these experiences for yourself and, frankly, to showcase for your college applications down the road. So I think it's key to document what you do as you do it, whether that's writing down the techniques you've learned from your class or the lab, or summarizing the different topics that you've learned. Trying to also form relationships with your mentors or the people you interact with for your experiences. And consider submitting the work that you do, if at all possible, for either publication or to take it potentially to a conference, right? This allows you to not only showcase what you've done, but then oftentimes to learn from others, particularly if you go to a conference. And maybe even, depending on what type of work you've engaged in, you might be able to enter some of the different science competitions with your work as well. right? So I think a lot of my students engage in great experiences and don't necessarily showcase those, or they're not sure how to quite take them to the next level, and that's important to consider. And speaking about taking things to the next level, there's another great way to do so within STEM if you have a STEM passion, and to take your STEM passion and again connect it to the community and social good. And that's through a leadership project. So a leadership project is the concept of a student organizing a project themselves. They are the head of whatever project they decide to do. And oftentimes it connects to something that they're really interested in. And this project allows a student to grow new skills, right? Enforce skills they already have, and really do something that's going to also benefit others and benefit the community, right? There are many different types of leadership projects that a student can engage in. And colleges love to see these projects because you're showing leadership, you're showing you can organize something, you can be mature, you're showing what you're passionate about and that you're really willing to go above and beyond for that passion, which they love to see. And they recognize you're gaining new skills and you're contributing to your community. And the two of some of the most important characteristics that colleges look for when admitting students, one is leadership, right? And a student's ability to sort of organize others, bring others together when they're on that college campus, and community engagement and their commitment to giving back. No matter what a student wants to study, these two things are incredibly important. So important that you will see colleges ask about leadership or community engagement or things that they did for the good of others in the actual applications. So leadership projects are a great way to really engage in these things. To give you just some examples, of types of leadership projects I've had students engage in that really connect STEM and social good. I had a student who organized a mentoring group where high school students were mentoring elementary and early middle school students and teaching them about different STEM topics that they typically wouldn't be exposed to until they were probably in high school. Things like engineering and marine biology. And the student orchestrated this because they thought that there was a real need for it. They were particularly interested in engineering and didn't really learn much about it until they were at the end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade. And they felt that if they had learned about it earlier, they could have engaged in a lot of other things. And they felt like that the elementary school students would really connect well, and the middle school students with the high school students who were not that long ago in their position. Other things that I've had students do, I've had students work to create apps or develop websites for nonprofit organizations to help them spread the word about what they're doing or to recruit volunteers. Right? A student can practice their skills in coding and design and all the things like that while really helping an organization in need who probably doesn't have the money or the budget to necessarily pay for a website designer, right? But websites are essential to all types of organizations. That's another thing. I've had students with an interest in healthcare organize special programming at nursing homes, right? To keep those in the nursing homes engaged, to go play music for them, to read to them, to even do local errands for them. And students might think, well, how's that connected to STEM? Well, if a student has an interest in STEM and healthcare, having exposure to oftentimes what are patients is incredibly important, right? So again, there's so many ways to use a leadership project to grow and show your interest in STEM while also really helping your community in a number of ways. So something else I want to talk about is once a student really is solidified that STEM is for them, right? Okay, they've done all of these things, they've showcased what they've done. What do they do next, right? Well, for most students, it's really going to be thinking about the next phase, right? The college experience. And part of that starts with thinking about the college search process. So what I tell students is, if you have an interest in STEM or pre-health, pre-med, it's really important to keep an open mind. There are many different career paths you can take having those interests. There's many different things you can major in. And when you start looking at schools, look at the different majors and options they have. Look at some of the unique opportunities. Colleges and universities have become really great about bringing together different areas of interest for students, right? And creating what are often called interdisciplinary majors that bridge together more than one topic. Maybe one topic is in STEM and another topic could be in humanities even, right? Another thing to think about in the search process is there's really different types of colleges and universities you can consider. They typically fall really into two categories overall. So one category are explorer schools and another category are path schools. Explorer schools tend to be college and universities that you apply to the school overall, you're admitted to the school, you have the opportunity typically for the first 2 years to take lots of different classes and explore, and at the end of your sophomore year of college, you announce what you particularly want to study. And then you study that thing kind of in detail for the next 2 years and you get your degree in whatever that particular major area is. This is a great option for students who have a lot of different interests or maybe who are not 100% sure. Maybe you explored your STEM passions in high school and you really love biology and chemistry and there's a lot of different routes to go with that and you're not sure, so you look at explorer schools. Path schools are schools that when you apply, you particularly need to know what you want to major in because you're going to tell the school on your application, I am applying to major in chemistry or neuroscience or biomedical engineering or something like that. And the reason that these schools do this is because the way they've set up their programs is that they have a lot that they want to teach you in the 4 years, very much associated oftentimes directly with that major that you plan to study, and they want you to start that process earlier. So this is a good option for students who have really taken advantage, thoroughly explored their options and their interests and passions in high school, and know what they want to study. And I definitely have students who will put both Explorer and Path schools on their final college list to have options down the road. And the one other thing I like to point out in reference to school types and majors and programs is there are certain programs called direct admit programs, where again, a student is applying very specifically to a particular program, and that program oftentimes has extra requirements associated with it, sometimes in the application process and in the time the student is at the school and college studying that material. And examples of this are like engineering or potentially nursing or what are known as dual degree programs. So dual degree programs are when a student applies in high school for really 2 degrees almost at one time. So for example, a student could apply potentially for a BS-MD program, which means that they're going to get their undergraduate degree in something and they're then immediately going to go into getting their medical degree, right? There are definitely some advantages to this. There's less, kind of applications in the end. A student doesn't have to apply to med school after applying, to college as a high school student. But of course, there's not a lot of these programs, and they want to take students who are absolutely sure this is what they want to do because they're committing to a path for the next 7 or 8, potentially even years, depending on what the program is. So something to consider is once you've grown, your STEM interests, you've really thought about the types of colleges and universities you're going to apply to, and you have that college list, it's very important to consider how you're going to leverage all of these things that you've done, how you're truly going to showcase these specifically in the college application process. So one thing I like to talk to students about a little bit is testing. This can be one way to potentially show some of your STEM passion and your aptitude for STEM subjects. So for example, the ACT, in addition to having math, which is a STEM subject, like the SAT, which has math, it also has a science section, a whole nother section to take. There are also AP classes and AP tests that you take at the end of the year associated with many STEM subjects. And AP exams, generally speaking, and their scores are not required to apply to college. But most schools will accept them and accept the scores. So if you take them and you do well, you can really showcase your aptitude or your strong abilities in STEM subjects to colleges and universities when you apply. Beyond testing, I tell students to really make sure that they have a college resume for when they apply. This, of course, is a little bit different than a resume a lot of people would think of for a job, but a college resume is going to focus on the different activities that a student's engaged in while they've been in high school. And standard, these activities are things that are anything a student has engaged in outside of their normal courses in school. Because your normal courses in school will be on your transcript and the grade report that gets sent, from your high school. But if that is, you did an internship, you took an online course, you did a summer program, you created a leadership project, you volunteered in a nursing home, all of these things absolutely count and go on the resume. And the resume lets you show what you did and also show the great skills you developed from doing these things. And it lets you showcase where you had leadership and where you had community engagement and community involvement. Because like we talked about, this is incredibly important to different colleges and universities, no matter what you end up wanting to study. And most colleges, or at least a good portion of them now, give you a place to specifically upload the resume in the application. Or for a lot of them, they'll just let you upload extra documents, and the resume could be one of those extra documents that you choose to upload. The other thing that I tell students is, when you've developed this STEM interest, you can actually show it during the college search process as you're working through finalizing your list and your applications. You can attend STEM-specific college tours. So certain schools, in addition to having their sort of standard tour, whether it's in person or online, they'll have a tour for the engineering school or the tour for the biology department or something like that, which is a great way to show them, hey, I'm interested, and for you also to learn more specifically about those STEM subjects at those schools. Students can connect with professors at colleges potentially also, especially if they have a unique interest in something. They may want to ask the professor, what is it like to be majoring in neuroscience at this school? What opportunities are available? Some colleges and universities will let you sit in on classes, and you may be able to sit in on a STEM-oriented class. And again, you might be able to consider applying to some science or STEM-specific programs that the school offers, rather than just generally applying to the school overall. Another place to sort of showcase your STEM interest in the application process is through the main application. So one of the main application systems is called the Common App. There are a few other application systems as well. But the Common App is a place where students can put in their basic information to have it sent to all colleges, where they go to high school, where they live, things like that. And then a different section of the application, they fill out questions for the specific schools. It's to help streamline the process. On that main part of the application, there are a few sections that you can absolutely work in talking about what you've done in STEM and what you've done to really better your community through that process. There's the activity section where you can list the different things you've done. Many of the things I've already mentioned, from online courses to leadership projects, can be mentioned there in very short form. They only give you 150 characters, but it is a good place to at least make a reference. There's something called the additional information section in the Common App, which gives you 650 words to kind of add additional information for whatever you'd like. So if I had a student who had a particularly meaningful leadership project, I might have them put the abstract or the overview for their project, or a particularly meaningful internship or research experience. There's also a section on the Common App that asks, what have you done associated with different colleges and universities? So whether you've taken and done a summer program or you've done courses for college credit, you can list that there as well. Now, some students, if they had a really meaningful experience associated with STEM or maybe pre-health during their high school experience, they may choose to talk about that in their main college essay. It's definitely not a requirement at all to talk about your STEM interest or your career interest in your main essay, but it may work into a particular question. So, for example, there's a question that asks about how a student has essentially grown and an experience they had that gave them a different perspective of themselves or someone else. And if a student potentially had a project where they orchestrated a mentoring program for students and senior citizens in a nursing home, they may have developed a completely different appreciation for the older generation, right? And what it's like to interact with them and what it's like to really give back to your community. That may be something they decide they want to talk about because it was so meaningful in their main essay. Besides the Common App part of the application, there's also the school-specific questions where the different colleges and universities you're applying to get to ask you the questions they want to ask. In this section, this is oftentimes where you might be able to upload a resume or additional documents. But they also have supplemental essays. And these are the essays that are specific to the particular school. Sometimes they'll ask you to discuss an important activity, or they may ask you to discuss what your academic interest is or why you're interested in this school. If they ask you an important activity, you can absolutely talk about something related that you did to develop your STEM passion and interest and better your community. If they ask you about your academic interest, obviously you can talk about your STEM interest here. Even in the why this school essay, right? A big portion about hopefully why you're interested in the school is part of their academic offerings that are going to let you take your interest in your STEM fields to the next level, right? You can talk about that. And also, certain schools will specifically do interviews or offer interviews. And this is another great time to really strongly talk about your interests and what you have done with your interviewer. So the one last very specific thing I want to talk about associated with the college application are portfolios. And I think a lot of students hear the word portfolio and they think that that's something that students who are interested in sort of visual or maybe performing arts are going to submit with their application. That is true. Visual artists, performing artists usually typically need to submit a portfolio, but portfolios are not just for artists. Students who are interested in science and STEM can absolutely submit what's called a STEM portfolio or potentially a STEM supplement. So what is this? This is oftentimes put together as sort of a PDF document really focused on a student's interests and activities and achievements connected to whatever the STEM topic is that they're passionate about. Right? So the other parts of the application, your general resume, your general list of activities, it's going to also have things that are not related to your STEM passion. But your supplement or portfolio will be focused on this. It may include an abstract of the research you've done, a description of the advanced techniques that you've learned, photos of maybe the project you worked on or a scientific poster you made to go to a particular conference. It will list the courses associated with STEM that you've done in school and out of school. It may, you may also make reference to a mentor who then submits a letter of recommendation separately on your behalf. This could be a researcher you've worked with or someone you shadowed. Or this could be someone at the community organization you were a part of. Maybe the person that heads up the nonprofit that you designed the website for, or the head of the nursing home that you volunteered at. I would say that the science supplement or portfolio is more nuanced. You really want to plan it out well. You want it to feel very professionally done. You want to put in that extra effort. This is definitely a time where I suggest seeking some professional guidance about how to put it together and what does it look like, whether that's from a teacher in school, a school counselor, or an outside counselor or consultant like myself. But this is definitely a time to really make sure you're organized, you have all the details, and it's put together really well. And it will absolutely help you stand out in the college application process. So the biggest thing I just want to remind students, when you're trying to grow your passions, when you're trying to better your community, right? When you're trying to grow as a person in high school, the biggest thing you can do is get involved. That is huge. The first step is taking some sort of action and go from there. So I just wanted to briefly give you an overview of what we at SAS, or Strategic Academic Success, the company I founded, offer. We do STEM and pre-health advising with students regularly. We also do tutoring and test prep, right? And we do all kinds of admissions counseling, and we absolutely have a specialty in working with students on leadership projects that are oftentimes STEM or healthcare oriented. And I talked about a lot of sort of these things intermixed into the presentation related to testing and STEM and applications. But I want to offer anyone who is watching the presentation a 30-minute consultation to talk to me and ask me any questions they may have about anything covered in this presentation that relates to STEM or community engagement, or frankly anything that has to do with the college preparation, search, and application process. If you're interested, feel free to send me an email about that. So again, I wanted to thank you, of course, for watching this presentation. I hope that you felt like you got a lot of great information out of it. Feel free, of course, to always come back to it and look at it again. And if you have further questions, do not hesitate to reach out by email or also by phone. And the website listed here gives a lot of our other presentations. If you're interested in looking, I do presentations about a lot of things associated with academics and the college preparation, search, and application process. I have an entire presentation talking about why leadership matters in the college process and really how to formulate a leadership project that oftentimes have like a strong community engagement and community service component to them. So if you're interested, definitely check out that link in that first under the website. And thank you again very much for joining us.